أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم.
Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen, wassalatu wassalamu ala rasulil kareem, amma ba'd. So alhamdulillah, last week we started the discussion of salat. We spoke about the timings of the salat, the 5 daily salat, Fajr, Zuhr, Asr, Maghrib and Isha, the exact timings which they begin in. Right now we have the calendars where it shows us, Fajr will come in at, whatever time it may come in at 5:15, 5:20, 5:25, and you have the little salats which comes in around 12:30. But what I discussed last week was how at the time of the Prophet ﷺ, in the hadith that are mentioned, when Jibreel alayhi salam prayed salat, and he taught Rasulullah ﷺ to pray salat, he prayed during certain times, and then Rasulullah ﷺ clarified to the Sahaba that these were the timings that Jibreel alayhi salam prayed the salat. So Fajr salat he prayed during this certain time, right? The little salat that was at this time where Jibreel alayhi salam prayed. Asr, Maghrib and Isha were at these certain times. Before we discuss the times of salat, we spoke about when salat was made obligatory, right? So if anybody can remember what was mentioned 2 weeks ago, when did salat become fard on the ummah, on the Muslims? After Mi'raj, yes. When did that take place? Which year?
A year before the migration.
Yes, a year before the migration to Medina, right? How long did the Prophet ﷺ spend in Makkah altogether after the prophethood? 13 years, right? And how long did he spend in Medina? 10 years. So a year before the migration, so you could say the 12th, you could say the 13th year of when Rasulullah was in Makkah, that is when salat became obligatory on the ummah, right? So for the first 12 years of the prophethood, there was no 5 daily prayers, right? Some scholars say that tahajjud was actually an obligation on the ummah, and then once the 5 daily prayers came, that abrogated the obligation of tahajjud, right? So we discussed Fajr Salat. When did Fajr Salat come in? When does Fajr Salat come in? Not the timing, but meaning, how could you tell if you had no clock or none of that at your disposal? How could you tell when Fajr Salat comes in?
Subh Sadiq.
Subh Sadiq, right? When was Subh Sadiq translated into English?
When you see the lightness in the corner of the...
There was a certain term that I mentioned. If anybody can recall that. That's literally the translation of Subh Sadiq.
When you see the horizon of the...
Okay, dawn. Almost there. What does Sadiq mean? True dawn, right? There's this term true dawn. So you have true dawn and you have false dawn. Yeah. Subh Sadiq, true dawn. And then you have Subh Kadhib, which literally means false dawn. So what's the difference between true dawn and false dawn? We discussed this also. How can you tell the difference between true dawn and false dawn?
False dawn is like a vertical type of...
Yes. False dawn is when there is a vertical light in the horizon. So once there's a vertical light in the horizon, that does not indicate the beginning of the Fajr Salat, right? When does Fajr Salat begin? True dawn, right? So if false dawn is a vertical light, then what's true dawn? It's a horizontal light, right? Once you see the horizontal light, then that's when the time of Fajr Salat comes in, right? We just also discussed the issue of 15 degrees and 18 degrees, right? So which one is correct? Both. Okay. Follow your masjid, basically. Whatever your masjid follows, follow that. If you follow 15 degrees, you can't say those who follow 18 degrees are wrong. Similarly, the other way around. Because you have proper scholars, Hanafi scholars, Indian scholars, Desi scholars, it doesn't get any more strict than that, who both, so some of them say 15 degrees, some of them say 18 degrees. So you can't say one of them is wrong and the other one is right. Both of them are right. You follow whatever your masjid follows, right? Don't make a huge fuss about it. So that was Fajr Salat. When does Fajr Salat end? Sunrise, right? That's pretty obvious. So what about Zuhr Salat? When does Zuhr Salat begin?
5 minutes after sun passes zenith.
Not 5 minutes necessarily. 10? Yeah, about 10 to 12 minutes after the zenith. The zenith is when the sun is at its highest point, right? So when the sun rises, it doesn't keep rising. There's a certain point which is known as istiwa. The sun stays still at the highest point for about 10 to 12 minutes. After that, once it starts to go down, then that's when Dhuhr Salat comes in, right? What about Asr Salat? When does Asr Salat come in?
2 times the shadow.
Yeah, when the shadow of an object or a shadow of a person, it's twice its length, right? That's when Asr Salat comes in. But we discussed the Shafi'i view as well.
And the shadow becomes 2.
Yes, twice a person's length. So if a person is 6 feet tall, then how would you know if the time of Asr has come in if there's no clock available or there's no calendar that you have?
If the shadow is 12
If
feet.
the shadow is 12 feet, right?
12 feet.
12 feet, yes.
The Shafis follow the one
Same.
body length.
Same.
Same.
Yes.
Yeah.
So can we pray during Shafi'i time?
Only if there's a need.
Only if there's a need, right? So what was described as a need?
If you know you won't be able to make it.
If you know that if I delay it until the Imam Abu Hanifa's view, which is when the shadow is twice a person's length, if you say that if I delay until that time, I'm not going to be able to pray the salat. If you're going on a journey or whatnot, in that situation, since there's a need, you could pray during Shafi'i time. It's not only Shafi'i time. It's actually an opinion in the Hanafi madhab too. The students of Imam Abu Hanifa, Imam Abu Yusuf, and Imam Muhammad, according to them, Asr begins when the shadow of a person is the same length as him. Right? So it was Imam Abu Hanifa who says the shadow of a person is twice his length, and that's the opinion which the scholars issue the fatwa on. So only in cases of need you can pray during the Shafi'i time. Right? You also discussed the need was if you're in a masjid where there are Shafi'is there and they pray earlier. In Saudi too, I believe, right? I've never been to Saudi, but they pray during Shafi'i. So you can join the Jamaat, there's no problem with that.
So even if there's no need, you can still pray with them?
If there was another Jamaat which is possible for you to pray during the Hanafi time, then you should wait until you pray that Jamaat. But if there's no other Jamaat and this is the only Jamaat that's going to be prayed, then you can join them.
Even if there's no need?
You would consider that as a need, right? Since it's Jamaat that's going on, you're not just going to leave it.
Yeah.
You get it? Okay, so we discussed Asr Salat begins. So I remember whenever Asr Salat begins, Dhuhr Salat ends at that time as well, right? Also, when does Maghrib begin? That's obvious. Maghrib begins at sunset, right? What about Isha Salat? This one was kind of tricky.
When the lights, the corner of the skies disappear.
When the sky turns black.
There's a certain lights that were mentioned, a certain colored light in the horizon that we mentioned, right?
The redness.
The redness, right? There's two opinions, right? One is the redness of the sky disappears, one is the whiteness of the sky disappears. So the difference is that the redness of the sky is basically when the sun is 15 degrees below the horizon. The whiteness of the sky disappears, that is when it's 18 degrees. So that is at a later time, right? So if you follow the view of when the redness disappears, then Isha will come in earlier. But if you follow the view of when the whiteness disappears, then Isha will come in later. Again, this is also an ikhtilaf within the Hanafi madhab, where Imam Abu Hanifa says when the whiteness disappears. So according to Imam Abu Hanifa in that scenario, Isha will start later. And according to the students of Imam Abu Hanifa, Imam Abu Yusuf and Imam Muhammad, it will start earlier, right? And the scholars say the safest route to take will be the view of Imam Abu Hanifa, where you pray your Isha at a later time. Right? That's the most precautious view. If there's a need, then you could pray it earlier. That basically covered all the time.
What do we follow here?
What?
Saudi?
I don't know. I think for Isha they probably follow 18.
I think we follow the earlier one because one Mufti came once and he didn't pray with us.
That's a little extreme.
Jamaat is always
Choose
late.
not to follow.
Jamaat time is always late, so it's safe.
No, one Mufti came from Chicago and then he gave a talk and then he went downstairs and where'd he go? He was not praying with us.
It was probably for some other. He's probably hungry or something.
No, we did the different time.
Or maybe when we have like that summertime when we have like very close time, so we go like
in Ramadan, because time comes late and we pay
Just
right away,
right away. So
Here,
that
15 degrees.
Oh, okay.
So we did 15, okay.
Hey, Dan. I'll ask him.
But
that covers the time.
15 degrees means that Fajr comes in later for us?
Later.
Later,
Because
Isha comes in early.
and Isha's the opposite.
The actual problem becomes when the Ramadan, when you have to stop the fast.
Yeah, that's the thing.
That's the main thing.
Again, follow your masjid.
During the
The,
Iqaf, though,
the most precautious view to adopt in Ramadan would be to stop eating at 15 degrees and pray Fajr at 18 degrees. Right? Oh, yeah, sorry, the other way around, sorry, 18 degrees. You stop eating at 18 degrees. That's the most precautious view, right? You don't have to follow that view, you could follow your masjid. If your masjid follows 18, follow 18. If your masjid follows 15, you follow 15, right? Try not to create ikhtilaf, separation, try to maintain unity. So today we'll be discussing the prohibited times of prayer. This is very important. Last week I came to give Jummah, I look at the clock, it says prohibited, and there's 20 people praying salaat. I was like, okay, what is this? Why wasn't that given at this time? So there's 3 times that are prohibited to pray salat, right? There's 3 prohibited times and 2 makruh times. The rulings for both are different. Right? They're slightly different. So the first is during sunrise. Right? Actually, no, just during sunrise will suffice. Right? So after Fajr, when the sun starts rising, at that time, you cannot pray any salat. You cannot pray fard, you cannot pray wajib, you cannot do qada. It will not even count, right? If you start your salat at that time, it won't even count, right? It's not like it will be fulfilled, but you'll be sent to it, won't even count, right? You'll have to do it at another time, right? Similarly, the ruling applies to the other 2. So you can't pray fard, you can't pray any wajib, like witr for example, you can't do qada of any salat, you can't pray janazah at this salatul janazah at this time, and you can't do sajda tilawat at this time, right? For janazah and sajda tilawat, this is if it became wajib before these times, right? So if, for example, right now I read an ayat of sajda tilawat is wajib on me, becomes wajib, and I don't do the sajda and I wait until sunrise, and I do sajda tilawat at that time. Since it became wajib on me before that, it won't count at this time. But now if during sunrise I read sajda ayat, or during sunrise salatul janazah becomes wajib, where now they bring the dead body, and now it is at this time where all the people gather, and then in that scenario you can pray and it will count, right? The second one is when the sun is at its highest point, meaning zenith, istiwa.
So we can pray janazah and during sunrise, it's ready.
If it becomes wajib at that time, then it will count, right? You still, we shouldn't pray janazah at those times, right?
Yeah,
We should make sure that janazah is being prayed, it should be outside at these times, and there is no possibility of it ending up during these times, right? So if it happens to occur during these times, then if you do it, it will count, right? But if it's delayed until these times, it became wajib before these times, then it won't even count if you do it during these times. That's the difference. Or when the sun is at its highest point, right? Again, the clock makes a beeping sound whenever it's istiwa time, and it's just prohibited. And then for those 10-12 minutes, you can't pray salat, right? If you engage in nafal, for example, it will count, but however, it will be haram though. That's the difference. Fard, wajib, qada, that won't count during these times, but nafal will count, but however, you will still get the sin for praying during this time. And during sunrise.
So you guys report and like sins at the same time?
No, the
He did sunrise number 1.
oh, during sunset. During sunset, right? And this is actually from when the sun becomes reddish. There's a reddish color of the sun until basically the sun sets. So during between this time you cannot pray any salat except for Asr. If you haven't prayed Asr and you delay until this time, you will get sick for it, but you still have to pray Asr. You're not going to say, I'm not going to pray Asr since it's a prohibited time.
So
That's the only exclusion over here when you pray your Asr at this time.
So that was one of our questions from last week. You know, when we mentioned sunset, sunset means that once the circular part of the sun has gone under the horizon, then that's when Maghrib comes in.
Yes.
Okay.
That's when it comes in. Right? So again,
For the Fajr will be the same, like if sun is rising and we didn't pray the Fajr for that day, can we pray?
no, for Fajr it won't. That's not the case for Fajr.
So
That's another thing. With
for,
the
if
Hanafi
so,
madhab.
so for Fajr, that means that sunrise means that as soon as the circular part of the sun breaks the horizon, that's it. Now we cannot pray Fajr anymore. Okay.
Until basically about 10 minutes after that, you're not allowed to pray salat.
I think it's a little more than that
About
actually.
10 to 15 minutes after that. So that's the thing in the Hanafi madhab, which is kind of weird. Where for Asr, you're allowed to pray, but for Fajr, you're not allowed to pray. The other madhabs, they say for both you can do this. The hadith is one who catches one rakat of Fajr, that he has caught Fajr, and one who catches one rakat of Asr, that he has caught that rakat. So Hanafi say that for Asr, they apply that, but for Fajr, no. Fajr will not count. So if you pray one rakat of Fajr, and then the second rakat you pray during sunrise, the Fajr doesn't count. You have to break your salat. But for Asr, say for example, if you pray during this prohibited time where it's after the sun becomes red, right? Then your Asr salat will count. The reason why one of the reasonings why the Hanafis they say this is because for Asr you began Asr salat at a disliked time where you could say they call it waqt naqis, a deficient time where the reward is less, right? And it's actually a makruh disliked time. So since you started it at this time, when you started it and when you finished, it was within the same time, right? It was in a makruh time. It was in what you call waqt naqis, a deficient time. That's what you literally translate it. But Fajr, that's not the case. Because if you catch one rakat of Fajr and then the next rakat you pray during sunrise, then there's a difference. The first rakat was done at a proper time, and the second rakat was done at a deficient time, or at the time where you're not supposed to pray salat. That's the difference that they mentioned. Mufti Taqi, on one of his books, in his commentary on Tirmidhi, he strongly refutes this. And he says this doesn't make sense. So according to him, he says for both it'll count, but a person will still be sinful. So he says for Fajr, it'll count. Even if you pray the second rakat during sunrise, it'll count, but a person will be sinful.
So as a person who does Asr during the sunset, is that considered makruh or is that considered prohibited?
That is an exception. This is the prohibited time, but the exception to that is Asr. You will be sinful for delaying Asr.
Because that's obligatory?
So it's better not to pray. Why you make
No, you have to pray. That's the obligation overrides
No, so
prohibition.
you know I'm gonna be entering into that time when the sunrise will happen. So why you are praying at that time?
Oh, salat, right?
Oh, for Fajr Salat.
Yes.
For Fajr Salat, if it occurs once in a while for a person, then some ulama they say that your Fajr Salat will count. Where if you're only able to pray, if it's the habit, then no. They say that if a person makes this a habit, then they should actually pray after the time of Fajr, after the sunrise.
So only once in a while?
If a person, this happens like once in a while, even like when we did the hadith, our teacher, he also mentioned this, that if it happens once in a while, then your salat will count, but it's still, you'll get the sin for praying during this time.
My question is the sin is good or to pray after the time?
Firstly, you should pray during the correct time, right?
Yes.
The obligation is still there. It doesn't matter if the timing is makruh, like for example, Asr Salat. You're not going to leave your Asr and say, oh no, it's a bad time. The obligation is still there. And the ulama say Asr is the only exception where you have to pray Asr now. You can't just leave your Asr Salat and say, I'm not going to pray it. The thing for Fajr is that most scholars, you'll find it, most fiqh books, they even say this, that if you don't have enough time to finish your Fajr, where you're like, a portion of your Fajr will be during the time of Fajr and a portion of it will be during the time of sunrise, they'll say your Fajr won't count and you'll have to make it up after the sunrise. There are some scholars who say that. Yes?
So Asr ends at Maghrib.
Yes.
So that's why you could pray after that with the sun setting, because it's still Asr time. But
Yeah,
for Fajr, it would be Fajr time when the sun rises.
Pretty much, that's one of the reasons why they give. And again, the prohibited time begins from when the sun becomes reddish, right? When it's like right at the edge of the borderline of setting, the sun at the horizon becomes red, right? The sun also becomes red. From that time until sunset is the prohibited time to pray your salat. Yes?
So I have this issue sometimes, like it says sunrise is 6:35 and then I'm done like around 6:32. But I'm confused because one website says sunrise 6:35, the other one says 34, 33, or even 32, and then I'm confused, like, so did I pray in sunrise or not? Like,
Whichever one has the later, you should follow that.
Make it
No, I
simple.
mean, you know, estimation, there's nothing where that this is the exact time for sunset. Some of them overestimated, or some of them probably even underestimated, where sunrise is actually say like 6:40, but they'll say like 6:38, 6:37. Some calendars might do that. Yes.
The time they is on the clock, so is estimate time or is pinpoint accurate time?
Again, you can't exactly tell if this is the pinpoint, the exact accurate time that it
It's
is.
estimate time, approximate.
Yeah, approximate time.
Best estimate.
Yeah.
I'm sorry,
That's fine.
I was told, I think like 10 years ago, before, was saying that you have to wait 19 minutes, 10 minutes before sunrise. Sunrise would happen, so we have to stop praying 10 minutes before sunrise.
that's another thing. And some people, like, they're like, oh, it doesn't count like after 10 minutes.
Or 10 minutes before sunrise, they say salat does it. No,
They-
salat will count.
they probably-
They're probably saying that that's not a proper time to pray a salat. You should
Yeah,
pray
they're
a
probably
salat
saying it for
after-
safety because if you finish it before then you know for a fact, okay, I caught Fajr.
Yeah.
That's probably why they're saying that.
Your Fajr salat will count at
The
that.
light
But again, you shouldn't delay your salat. There are certain mustahab timings for salat. I'll mention that in a future class. Fajr, this is the mustahab timing. Dhuhr, this is the ideal time to pray. Asr, this is the ideal time to pray. And depending on the season, it changes. So, for example, in Dhuhr, in the summer, it's mustahab to delay Dhuhr, right? But in the winter season, that's not the case, right? They don't say delaying Dhuhr is mustahab. They actually pray it at its time. Right? So this covers the prohibited timings. Now there are makruh timings.
So Asr, there is a confusion that if we practice that once you pray Asr, the first, after that there is no namaz, cannot pray anything, nafil, qaza.
That's not makruh time.
Only but
After Asr, it's makruh to pray salat. After that time, any engaging in you don't.
Asr,
Sorry?
if Asr just starts, you pray the Asr.
Okay.
Asr first. After that you cannot pray anything.
No. That's the makruh time. After you perform the Asr salat,
Yeah,
it's makruh to perform any other salat after that. Right? And
How about Fajr Salat of the Asr, other Asr?
you can pray qada at that time.
But Fajr Salat, you come, Jamaat is ready and having a good sunnah.
You pray your sunnah first. If you know that you can still, I could pray the sunnah, then I could still catch the salat, and you pray your sunnah first.
Yeah, but the Jamaat is there, so.
Doesn't matter. If you think you're gonna miss the jamaat, if you say if I pray my sunnah, I'm gonna miss the jamaat, then you join the jamaat. Right? So if the imam is in like the first rakat of Fajr, you can catch the salat. You could pray your 2 rakat sunnah, and you could catch maybe the second. You can definitely catch the second rakat. Right? This only applies for Fajr. For other prayers, as I mentioned last week, 2 weeks ago, it doesn't apply for other prayers. So I give you an example for Dhuhr salat. If you're praying your first sunnah and then the iqamat is given, then the scholars say if you're on your 4th rakat, then you'll complete the salat. But if you're on the 3rd rakat and you didn't complete your 3rd rakat, you'll break your salat and join the jamaat. And you'll make it up afterwards.
So if you didn't make the sunnah, you can pray right away after Fajr, or you have to wait for after sunrise?
Fajr, if you miss the sunnah, then you don't make it up. If you prayed the Fajr and you miss the sunnah, you don't make up the sunnah. So say for example, you came, the jamaat, the people were praying in congregation, and the imam was in the 2nd rakat and he was sitting in tashahhud. So if you pray your salat, you're going to miss the salat, so you go and you join the salat and you prayed the fard, or you stood up and you read those 2 rakats that you missed with jamaat, then you won't make up the sunnah in that scenario. The sunnat is only made up for Fajr when you miss it along with the Fard. So if I miss Fajr Salat, I didn't pray Fard and I didn't pray the Sunnat, and then I'll make up the Sunnat along with the Fard.
That's only before Zohar comes in, right?
Yes, before Zohar.
Okay.
If I delay it until Zohar Salat comes in, I'll only make up the Fard.
Then when you are in Safar, so when you're traveling, so Fajr Sunnah you have to pray?
Yes, that will still remain. Fajr Sunnat will still remain. So the makruh time, the first one was after Fajr Salat until sunrise. Right? And the second was after Asr Salat until sunset. These are the two makruh times. One other point I failed to mention was during the 3 prohibited times, I mentioned if a person prays nafil, it'll count if he starts his nafil. However, it is wajib for him to break the nafil salat. It'll be wajib for him to break it and pray it at another time. Okay? That's one point I failed to mention. Again, so these are the two makruh times. The first one is after Fajr Salat until sunrise. The second is after Asr Salat until sunset. Right? This is the makruh time for prayer. So the person should not engage in any salat during this time. It will be makruh. Makruh tahrim. So that'll cover the prohibited times of salat. Next week, I'll briefly discuss the mustahab timings of salat. Which timings are the ideal times to pray each and every salat. Fajr, there's a difference for Fajr according to Shafis and Hanafis. Shafis pray earlier and Hanafis pray later. And then the Dhuhr, Asr, Maghrib and Isha, there's also a slight difference of opinion. Any other questions whether I have? If you like, I'll take it for your time. SubhanAllah,